Hadith number 228. The Prophet ﷺ, in this hadith number 228 of provisions for the seekers, al-Talibin, he says, من رأى منكم منكرا فليغيره بيده فإن لم يستطع فبلسانه فإن لم يستطع فبقلبه وذلك أضعف الإيمان. He among you who sees a wrongdoing should rectify it with his hands. If he is unable to do this, then by speech, and if he is unable to do this either, then with his heart, and that is the weakest degree of faith. So here there's a ranking of a person's levels of faith, and also a tier by tier and methodological way of dealing with something that is happening wrong for someone or in front of someone. So essentially the first thing the Prophet ﷺ is saying, that if you see anything unlawful that is happening, then stop it with your hand. That means physically stop it. What it means by physically stop it is that you do whatever is in your control to a certain amount. It doesn't mean you have to like leave everything you're doing and just be on that for 10 years and you still can't stop it. It's not really the point here, right? Because then that would go into the second or third category anyway. So it's not about becoming obsessed with something. It's about dealing with it with wisdom. That's very important. You don't want to become blindly dealing with something, because then you're not really efficient. It needs to be done with wisdom. That's very important. So the first thing is that if in your wisdom, and your wisdom should not be watered down here just because you don't have enough bravery and courage. That's another thing that you have to consider as well. So if you can stop something physically, then you must do it physically. And physically could mean that if it's a function that's going to take place that's not going to be very halal, for example, then if the function is left to you and you are part of that function, you are one of the organizers of that function, in fact they're relying on you for that function, then you can easily stop it. Or you give it up. If you can't stop them, then you have to come out of it. You can't be part of it. So you have to use any way or shape or form to try to stop it physically. If you can't go out and physically stop something because it's happening somewhere else, you can't really go and physically do something because it's going to cause a fight. It's going to cause a really bad reaction, in the sense that it's going to become really ugly and it's going to be way more magnified, and the purpose is not going to be there. Then you have to avoid that, and then you have to do it in a different way. Mainly, this is actually speaking about situations where you can efficiently, physically stop someone. Then you must do it. So, if you read the works of Imam Ghazali, if you read what Bajuri has written, and a number of the other scholars that have dealt with akhlaq and amr bil ma'ruf and nahi anil munkar, what they will normally refer to here is that all of this will be governed by the fact that you can efficiently take care of it. Otherwise, why would the Prophet ﷺ make you move from level 1 to level 2 and then speak about a level 3 as well? If it was that if you saw wrong, you must go in there and die for it to change it, then clearly there would be no level 2 or 3, because that would be what you would have to spend your life doing. But what the Prophet ﷺ is saying, that if you can stop it physically, do so efficiently. If it's going to happen efficiently, if they're not going to listen to you physically do it, they're just going to go right back to doing it, then you don't just do it just to make a point, if that point is not going to be well taken by them. If it's something that they can reflect on afterwards and they will respect afterwards, then maybe so, yes. So the main point here is that if you can efficiently do something and people will listen to you, and you can change it and you can move it, you can switch it off, you can take it away from them, you can do something else, then in that case you do it physically with your hand. And if you are unable to do that because you know that it's not going to work, then you do it with your tongue. So you tell them no. You tell them no. Now in this case, see, this is a bit of a lower category and it's less intense than the first one, right? Because you're not provoking them as much by taking away something of theirs. Let's just say that they're watching something haram, or they are playing with something haram, they're gambling for example, you go there and you just swipe their cards away, you take all of their chips away, right? If they're really into it, a gambling person, you don't want to mess with that person. The person is addicted. They're going to come after you, right? A person with a bottle, right, of wine or drugs or whatever, it just depends what level they're into. So if you cannot efficiently do it physically, then you at least speak to them with your tongue. Now speaking with your tongue, there's a great different ways of doing that in wisdom. I mean, in the first one as well, you could take something and hide it away so that they don't know. And just for the fiqhi purpose, it's permissible to do that. In fact, the fuqaha have written that if somebody's got a haram object and you went and destroyed that, you're not liable. Normally, if you destroy somebody's property, you are liable, right? You're liable. But in this case, if it's an object that is purely haram, not something that could go both ways, it's purely haram, and a bottle of wine or something, and you went and dropped it down here, I don't know what you're talking about, right? You're not liable. I'm not sure if that's the best way to do something, but you're not liable, right? That's what the fuqaha have written. When you stop something with your tongue, I mean, even if they're not going to listen to you, but if it is going to have some impact, they will reflect somewhat, you should say it with your tongue at least, if you can't even physically do something about it. And if even you've got to a level with certain people where even saying it verbally is going to just put up a greater barrier between you two. Because in some cases, especially with brothers, sisters, sometimes with parents, sometimes with children, you keep telling them, you become a nag. Then they don't want to listen to you. And then after that, they want to avoid you. So they just want to be in another room. And that relationship is important to be able to rectify them, eventually reform them and help them afterwards, to give them some support afterwards. So in that kind of a case, you probably have to resort to just telling them once in a while. And then it has to be with wisdom, the way you tell them. It's not about making a point. Look, I've told you now, I don't care. I just have to say it. It's not about that. It's about getting the word through to them. For example, what you've got nowadays online as well is people who are of a certain manhaj, a certain methodology, a certain persuasion, a certain belief. They follow ideology. And they think that another ideology is completely wrong and incorrect. So for example, I received an email, one of our websites, we received an email the other day from someone just saying, you guys call yourselves Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi, Hanbali, Ikhwani, and he had these number of names. None of these existed during the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and you should listen to the scholars of Medina, you should listen to scholars like Ibn Abdul-Wahhab and Ibn Taymiyyah, and he's just giving this whole, and I wrote back to this person and I said, look, I don't know what your intention is. But if your intention is to reform someone you think is doing wrong, then clearly this way is not going to work. Because what you're doing here is you're saying, this is my position, this is your position is wrong, my position is right, you should follow my position. Why should we do that? If somebody is following something for so long in this particular way, how can you make them just change and switch over in one way, but just by telling them your way is wrong? If they knew their way was wrong, they wouldn't have been following it in the first place. You can't convince somebody that their way is wrong in one day. It takes a very long time. And it requires tact. So I'm trying to give him some nasiha that look, if you really think that we're wrong, then please talk in a way that I'd like to speak to you about something. You know, there are certain things on my mind and we need to speak about it. Because you're saying that none of these words existed during the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Fine, the word Salafi didn't exist then either. Many words did not exist. That doesn't mean that they're right or wrong or anything of that nature. You're just presuming certain things and you're taking that for granted and you're trying to just essentially tell somebody change the one way. In any wisdom, how many people are you going to change? You're just creating a fight and disunity. Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, when a person came to study with him, his name was Uthman al-Batti. He was from Basra. He'd come to study with Imam Abu Hanifa in Kufa. And the people in Basra, they had their own imams, they had their own fiqh, and they didn't like Abu Hanifa's because it was different to what they were following. So they hadn't really recognized it as such. Imam Abu Hanifa knew this, so when this Uthman had finished studying and he was going back to Basra, he warned him, he said, look, I don't want you to go back and make haste in taking up one of the pillars in the masjid in Basra, because that's the way traditionally it used to work. If you were giving a dars, you'd go into the masjid, there'd be an empty pillar, there'd be many pillars in the big masjid of the city. You'd take a pillar and then students would start gathering around you. Right? If you've got something useful to say, they'll listen to you. So he went, he sat down, he started teaching, قال أبو حنيفة, قال أبو حنيفة, قال أبو حنيفة. And the people of the area just evicted him out of the masjid. Imam Abu Hanifa told him, don't make haste in doing that, they will throw you out. Then one of the greatest students of Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Zufar, who most people have probably heard of, who's the third great Imam of the Hanafis, he was also from Basra, also from one of the families of Basra. When he went back, he died in very, very young age. He died about 8 or 9 years after Imam Abu Hanifa passed away. So when he left, he did not start his own dars. Now look at this. He didn't start his own dars. I mean, he was probably more qualified than many people in that city. Right? Even many of the ulama of that city was probably more qualified than him. He did not start his own dars. And we have to realize that if there's a prevailing opinion, understanding, culture in a certain area, you can't just go there and change it in a day and say you're different. Right? That you'll create a lot of enemies. Yeah, a few people will believe you, there'll be somebody to follow you, but you're going to create a lot of animosity and division. So what he did was he just attended the other gatherings. He attended the other gatherings and learnt and listened to them. And whenever the opportunity presented itself, he would mention the alternative opinion without mentioning who the opinion was from. So he'd say, oh yes, in this issue there's also another opinion, this is the evidence for it. So he was also backing up his opinion. And slowly they started wondering, well, these are really nice opinions, they're very plausible, they're very valid, they're very sound opinions. Where are you getting these opinions from? And eventually he told them that these are Abu Hanifa's opinions. And he said, these are great opinions. That's how the Hanafi school was able to actually then spread in Basra. Otherwise, the hasty way that the earlier student had tried, it didn't work out. And it's very important. I remember when I first went into a community, and I was speaking, and these people had never had an imam before in their masjid. So people were muftis in their own rights. Each one of them was a sheikh in their own right, in a sense. They gave their own fatwas, because that's what you do when you don't have an imam in a community. Everybody's a mufti of their own. I don't blame them. It's just the way it is, right? I blame them because they don't get an imam, but on the other hand, there's no imam to look after them. That's just the way it is. So I remember I mentioned that something was wrong, and I think it was too early for me to mention it, because you have to create iman in the hearts of people for them to be able to understand that something is right or wrong. If you don't have the iman in the heart to accept something, then it's going to be very difficult, because you're telling them to take a plunge. So I remember I got quite a bit of opposition when I first spoke about that particular point. 3 years later, one of the same guys that had opposed me in the beginning was speaking about it very strongly. And I just thought back and I said, subhanAllah, it took 3 years. It took 3 years for the basis to be made and for the person to understand the real right and wrong, haqq and batil, deviancy, halal, haram. It takes a while for people. You can't just take people off in one day. That's very important to understand. That's why this hadith is telling us that if it was a categorical command that you must physically go and stop something and continue to do so until you can, then the other stages would not exist. However, the fact is that if a person's iman is strong, right, the stronger it is, the more possible the iman is strong. Allah has provided the person with an intellect and insight. That person is going to be able to do a lot more. Eventually, it's going to take time. With the Prophet ﷺ, there were people who never believed. And they probably would not have believed even if he carried on for many years. Just like with Nuh alayhi salam. And yet, there were many others that believed, but it took a while. Khalid bin Walid, it took him a while. Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, it took him a while. Abu Sufyan took a while. He came back. He did come to Islam, but it took him a while. Amr ibn al-As, radiyallahu an, he said Islam had entered the truth of it, and a wavering of his previous beliefs had come into his heart when he was sent as the ambassador to Negus in Abyssinia to bring back the Muhajirin that had first gone to Abyssinia. He was the one who was sent by the people of Makkah to Abyssinia to bring them back, because he was a good spokesperson, very diplomatic, he was very shrewd, very intellectual, and he had contacts with the leaders. So he went there, and when he saw what happened in front of him, Ja'far radiallahu anhu's speech, he said, my heart had melted then, but it took him a number of years afterwards until he became a Muslim. And then Khalid bin Walid became Muslim. Then Muawiyah radiallahu anhu became Muslim just before, just around the conquest time, because he saw all these other people, and it takes a while, even with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But anyway, here it's saying that if you could another way to look at this hadith would be that if you can physically take in, but you don't think you're able to, right? But it is physically doable, but you're not able to, and then you do it with your tongue, but you can't even do it with your tongue, and you're forced to just think bad about it because you just don't have enough. Many people have this problem today, is they think we're not pure enough, so how can we tell somebody else? I've just heard this so many times. We're not pure, so how can we tell someone else? And then there's a Quranic verse, لِمَ تَقُولُونَ مَا لَا تَفْعَلُونَ. Why do you say that which you do not do yourself? That is obviously a ploy of shaitan at the end of the day. We may not be good in everything else, but in this particular thing, if you're strong, then please do something. Otherwise, there will be no amr ma'ruf and nahy al-munkar. And if the scholars start saying the same thing, then what? In fact, people like Hassan Basri, Ibn Kathir has related this quite extensively, that this verse does not apply to scholars, because nobody's perfect. And anybody who really is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they're going to be considering many things deviant about themselves, not deviant, but defective about themselves, and sinful about themselves. Because if there's somebody who just scraped his hand on somebody's wall and he couldn't sleep for 40 days, right, because he felt that he'd done something wrong to someone, can you imagine it? So everybody's going to feel like that. But if scholars also stop telling people, because they think they're not perfect, because nobody's perfect anyway, this whole institution of Amr al-Ma'ruf and Nahy al-Munkar, this advice system we have, is going to die out. So that's something that we should not make as a complete excuse, because that is the weakest degree of faith, to just think bad silently in your heart. It says that then the person's Iman is like a mustard seed. Subhanallah, may Allah protect us from that state. Worse still than that is if there is a haram and a person becomes so habituated to that haram that they don't even think bad of it anymore. They don't even have remorse anymore. They justify it. Where's the Iman gone then? That's the question we must ask to ourselves. Forget about stopping it with your hands or with your tongue. We're not even thinking bad of it. So what is left of Iman after that? That is scary. So if we're doing something haram and we don't feel remorse over it, and we're happy over it, then we got a problem. One of the scholars pointed out, it's like the soap operas we watch, the movies we watch. And there is a couple on there doing, even if they're just kissing, it's haram. Right? It's haram. Or there's, most places, most of these things have romance in there. There has to be a love story as part of even a violent crime scene, right? There has to be a love story in there. And if in your heart you're saying, I hope he gets her, he's going to be successful, and you kind of cheer for him in your heart, then think about this hadith. One is you enjoy it, and then you cheer for it, you don't even think it's wrong. That is worse than you enjoy it. Subhanallah, you enjoy it, but you think it's wrong. There's a level of difference between the two. In here, you're begrudgingly watching it because you're overcome with your habit of watching such or enjoyment of such. And the other one is that you're totally taken over. May Allah protect us from that state. But this is really where a lot of us are when the TV and these things are so prevalent. We don't even think bad. We actually cheer them on. Yes, go do it. Go get it, type of thing. Or go get him. It's the other way around a lot of the time as well. May Allah protect us. We don't really know what the sign of our iman is. Then isn't it difficult to pray salat then on time? It doesn't matter if you... And same thing is if we miss our salat, we don't feel bad about it. For example, let's just say that you went to sleep late. You couldn't get up for Fajr. Right? You couldn't get up for Fajr. Right? And so you slept through, and when you get up you think, great, I had a very long sleep. And you don't feel remorse over Fajr. Subhanallah, I just wonder what our state of our faith is. May Allah strengthen our faith. The ulama mention about this also is that when you say by speech, it obviously refers to giving advice, admonishment, or mentioning the warnings and dangers of something, mentioning a hadith, for example, the evils of something. And it becomes fard and obligatory to rectify someone or something if the thing that's taking place is completely haram. Then it's actually fard to stop it. To stop it with your hand, if not with your hand, then with your tongue, and if not, then at least think bad of it. So it's fard to go through this process of trying. If the wrongdoing is of not that degree, but it's of a makruh, it's a makruh act, an undesirable act, not completely haram, but an undesirable act that's taking place, then in that case it's mustahab to stop it. It's highly recommended to stop it, but it's not fard to stop it.